Okay, we're live.
Do we want to begin now, or do we want to wait for a few people to join?
We can wait a few people if you want. Maybe we can ask people to introduce themselves.
Okay, as of now, my name is Saeed Mizyed. I'm a member of National Students for Justice in Palestine steering committee.
Hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin Abaid, and I'm a student at UCSD.
My name is Rabab Abdulhadi. I teach at San Francisco State University and direct the Ahmed Studies program, Arab and Muslim ethnicities and diaspora studies.
Okay, are we ready to begin at this point? Excellent. So good morning, afternoon, and evening to everyone tuning in across the United States and the world. And thank you for joining National Students for Justice in Palestine in this webinar on campus political repression, featuring Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi with questions from Yasmin. Before I go through introductions, I wanted to start with a land acknowledgement. We are on stolen land, or stolen indigenous land, home to hundreds of tribal nations who are the original caretakers of Turtle Island. As we work to be in solidarity with Palestinians fighting for land and liberation, we work to do the same with tribal nations here. So again, my name is Saeed Mizyed, and I'm a member of the National Students for Justice in Palestine Steering Committee. NSJP is an independent grassroots organization created in 2010 to fill a growing need to coordinate campus activism efforts and host central gatherings for young activists across the United States and North America. NSJP is composed of students and recent graduates who provide support to approximately 200 Palestinian solidarity organizations on university and college campuses, as well as taking part in the broader national and global solidarity movement for Palestinian freedom, justice, and equality. NSJP's work is centered on freedom, justice, and equality for Palestinian people who have been living without basic rights under Israeli military occupation and colonialism since 1948. NSJP stands against homophobia, misogyny, racism, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, classism, colonialism, ableism, and bigotry, and discrimination of any form. We believe that all struggles for freedom, justice, and equality are interconnected, and we must embody the principles and ideals we envision for a just society.
Yes. Thank you, Sadia, for that. Hello, everyone. My name is Yasmin Abaid, and as I mentioned, I'm a current student ethnic studies at UCSD. I'm originally Palestinian. I'm an unapologetic Muslim Palestinian who was born in Los Angeles, but actually was raised in Palestine until I graduated high school, similar to Dr. Abdulhadi's background. I came here to the US after finishing high school for college, and have been doing ethnic studies since. I consider myself to be a community organizer and an advocate for all people, including the Palestinian people. And I work with many local organizations here in San Diego, including Majdal Center, the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans, Pillars of the Community. And on a national level, I work with Feminist Front as well as others. I think the one thing I really want to highlight about Feminist Front is that we're an organization that is dedicated to fighting white supremacy, anti-Blackness, and settler colonialism. And we're mainly led by women of color and queer and transgender people of color theories of change. And we are open to everyone in all genders. So I highly encourage y'all to check us out and be part of the incredible work we are doing on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin, and we're so glad that you're joining us here today. And I'm also excited to introduce our esteemed speaker, Dr. Abdulhadi. So Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi is Director and Senior Scholar of the Arab and American Ethnic and Diaspora Study at San Francisco State University. Before joining SFSU, she served as the first director of the Center for Arab American Studies at University of Michigan, Dearborn. Dr. Abdulhadi is a prolific writer with over 80 articles in 7 languages in academic and non-academic publications. She is a founding editorial board member of Islamophobia Studies Journal, co-author of Mobilizing Democracy, Changing U.S. Policy in the Middle East, and co-editor of several anthologies, including Arab American Feminism and American Quarterly's Forum on Palestine and American Studies. She's currently editing an anthology on teaching Palestine, pedagogical praxis, and indivisibility of justice, and working on the oral history of Palestinian women's activism in North America, Palestine, and throughout Palestinian diasporas. At SFSU, she's developed the AMID academic minor with courses such as Palestine, Islamophobia, civil liberties, and gender and modernity. She created the Edward Said Scholarship and a partnership with An-Najah National University, the first and only agreement SFSU has with any site in Arab and Muslim communities worldwide. Dr. Abdulhadi is a public intellectual who is equally committed to the principles of indivisibility of justice. She co-founded the California Scholars for Academic Freedom, U.S. Campaign for the Academic and Cultural Boycott of Israel, Feminists for Justice for Palestine, U.S. branch of the General Union of Palestinian Students, Union of Palestinian Women's Association in North America, and Palestine Solidarity Committee. Professor Abdulhadi is the recipient of New Century Scholarship, Yale Sterling Prize Fellowship, Alex Roda Memorial Award, Lucius Walker Community Organizing Award, and was recently named San Francisco Bay Area Visionary by the National Women's Studies Association. She is the faculty advisor to 4 SFSU student groups: Afghan Student Association, General Union of Palestinian Students, Muslim Student Association, and Muslim Women Students Association. Dr. Abdulhadi has also been a solid supporter of student and youth activism. She has mentored SJP and spoke at events on many campuses, including keynoting 2 national conferences in Houston in 2017 and 2018 in UCLA's conference, which has been targeted by Zionist groups with a smearing and baseless complaint to the Department of Education. So at this point, we're going to begin asking our questions. So the first question we have for you, Dr. Abdulhadi, is what has changed in organizing for Palestine due to COVID-19?
I think, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. Thank you, Yasmin, for initiating this interview. Thank you, National Students for Justice in Palestine, not only for hosting me, but for all the work that you're doing day in and day out and continue. I think that, first of all, I want to first start by offering my support, my love, my condolences to everybody who passed as a result of COVID-19 and everybody who passed in general. And I also wish speedy recovery to everyone who is actually in hospitals. I'm very, very concerned about people who are less than, because even the whole question of social distancing and the instructions that we're getting does not apply to everybody equally. So I want to give a big thank you for especially the health workers, majority of whom and people who are actually doing the essential work, majority of whom are people of color, are women, come from marginalized communities, do not get as paid as much as other people and so on. So this is the situation not only in Palestine, but it's also here in the US and everywhere around the world. And I think what changed, something that has changed for all of us in general, that the crisis itself has exposed the inequalities and the marginalization of multiple communities. In Palestine, we know now that actually Israel has is trying to use the data that they've been spying on the Palestinians since 2002. We know there is other spying, but we know this is particular thing that Israel has been doing and trying to use that data. And Israel actually has not stopped. There's some things that continue. For example, the demolishing of homes of prisoners is continuing. The Palestinian prisoners who are in prison is continuing. The fact that Israeli interrogators actually infected Palestinian prisoners while they were torturing them with the COVID-19 is quite alarming. The fact that Israeli prison authorities tell the Palestinian prisoners, use your socks to protect yourself from COVID-19. And we know that Palestinian prisoners, like Palestinians in refugee camps, like people in various marginalized communities around the US, especially in native communities, in communities of color, in poor communities, are crammed in very small places and actually cannot afford even the social distancing that people who are much more well off can afford. People who are living on, who are undocumented, cannot actually afford to get their salaries continuing. This is the same that occurs for home workers and for people who are domestic workers and people who are delivering and so on and so forth. So I want to actually stress that. Now, with the terms of organizing for Palestine, I think it's like organizing anywhere. There is something that's also very alarming about this, is that what happens whenever there are crises, the powers that be always try to establish facts on the ground, create facts on the ground while people are being distracted by crisis around the world. So one of the things that we have seen, and I think students probably can speak to that more, is that we have seen increasing attacks. So against campus activism, against not only in terms of Palestine itself, that Israel is now talking about annexing more parts of Palestine, the fact that Area C in the West Bank that is completely unattended because Palestinian Authority even cannot get to it, the fact that people in Gaza are blockaded and there are not ventilators, Israel is not allowing that to come in. So I think it's really, really important to mention that. And the reason I'm mentioning that in connection with the organizing, because there is nothing we do that is separated and divorced from the situation about the people with whom we are expressing solidarity with and working around. We're not only expressing solidarity with the Palestinians, of course, we are in solidarity and we are against injustices anywhere, but we are focusing on Palestine. So that's why I'm mentioning the question of Palestine. So what's happening is that the situation on the ground is getting much worse. And at the same time, Zionist groups and the Israeli government and their supporters in the White House are actually trying to create more facts on the ground by trying to take away any gains we have made, by trying to actually suppress our rights further and so on. So I'm kind of concerned about that. At the same time, I have to say, as an activist, as an organizer, I'm not only a scholar, I am very encouraged by the fact that people are continuing to do whatever they can in their power to change things and continue struggling. And of course, always acknowledging that we don't all come from the same equal places. So that is really, really important to underscore as we talk some more about this.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Abdulhadi, for that. As you know, this was initiated because I am currently doing research on how false accusations of anti-Semitism are used on a daily basis to silence Palestinian activism in academia and everywhere. Today, we would like to focus a little bit on academia and ask you to share with us an instance that you were targeted, smeared, or silenced due to your Palestinian activism in academic spaces. Thank you.
Thank you. So let me just first start by saying that none of these attacks actually happen in a vacuum. As I was saying before, I think it's really important to emphasize that the attacks in the academy and the attacks on me and on all of us is part and parcel of the Zionist attempts to silence the voice of Palestine, to crush Palestinians, to erase any possibilities of Palestinian self-determination. This is not new. This is over 100 years old. And the fact that they have failed again and again and again, and Palestinians are still here, Palestinians are still speaking for themselves. This in itself is causing Zionist groups massive panic and desperation. And they, as a result, they actually escalate the attacks against us. I also should say that this is part and parcel of a very well-financed network by right-wing mega donors such as Sheldon Adelson and Hayim Sabban and many others. It's also an attack that's also sanctioned by the highest levels of government here in the United States, including the President Trump, who actually issued an executive order in December of this past year, basically outlawing, almost outlawing Palestinian voices and Justice in for Palestine by claiming that any organizing and any incidents of anti-Zionism are equivalent to anti-Semitism, and we know this is not the case. So let me say, in this sense, you asked me about incidents, so I'm just going to give you a list, some of the things that in which I see incidents that are happening and what shape they take. And this actually applies to many others. The first is the accusations of anti-Semitism and terrorism. This, for me, it's particularly escalated at San Francisco State in 2014 by the Amcha initiative, one of the leading Zionist right-wing groups that continues to harass all of us. That in the sense that they've actually targeted me for leading a delegation to Palestine, academic and labor delegation. They've attacked Palestinian universities. I've also been targeted by the Horowitz Canary mission, along with many colleagues of mine and students around 10 university campuses in 2016, in which they put out posters claiming that I'm engaging in Jew hatred. They targeted Students for Justice in Palestine. They targeted many of my colleagues. There is also one of the examples about the accusations is, for example, a campus watch, which is also another anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab Islamophobic, led by Daniel Pipes, who is classified as a leading Islamophobe, who actually has been tweeting, but one of the tweets about this happened after when we were about to go to Palestine in 2018 for the Teaching Palestine conference with Birzeit and An-Najah, and they posted a tweet about that I'm terrorist and so on, and against the president of the body, of the student body president at Birzeit University. Allgemeiner, which is another publication, for example, has waged a campaign against my co-organizing of the US anti-prison delegation in 2016, and specifically the attack escalated in January 2017 as efforts to free the Puerto Rican prisoner Oscar Lopez Rivera began to increase, and Oscar Lopez Rivera was going to be released. So they published several articles accusing me of claiming that the people we took are major terrorists and they were the most wanted on the FBI list and so on and so forth. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect is the ways in which my words, and this also applies to many others, have been misrepresented, taken out of context. For example, one of the things that has happened in 2018 is that the president of our university issued a statement welcoming Zionists to campus. I found that quite troubling, and I wrote a dear colleague letter to my colleagues in which I said that this statement by President Wang welcoming Zionists to campus, that seems like a declaration of war against Arab, Muslim, Palestinian communities, as well as the broader communities of justice, as well as our Jewish sisters and brothers, for whom Zionist doesn't speak and Israel doesn't speak. What they did, and I demanded that the president take it back, and I asked for all of us to remember that it was the 50th anniversary of the San Francisco student strike in 1968-69, and the 50th anniversary of the College of Ethnic Studies that came out as a result. What the Zionist groups, led by, again, Amcha and other Zionist groups, Zionist Organization of America and so on, what they did is they cut off my quote. They only quote that I said declaration of war as if it is on behalf of Arab, Muslim, and Palestinian, to represent me as somebody who only has special interests. And then they said that this was an incitement to violence against Jews and threatening of Jewish students. Then they went and they took my Facebook page, which I posted in the statement by one of the student groups that was formed as a result when after President Wang welcomed Zionists to campus. The student group's name is Jews Against Zionism. It's the student group that says that, look, you cannot claim to represent Jewishness, you cannot claim to speak for all of us. And some students, I wasn't actually on campus, I was out of town on that period, but students went and wrote, apparently chalked all around, Zionists are not welcome. And the title of Jazz's statement was Zionists are not welcome. I shared it on my Facebook page. My statement around President Wang was shared on Ahmed's Facebook page. So this, now Amcha went and took my quotes out of context, took my statement out of context, cut out big parts of it, and they placed it on to try to agitate people to claim that I am I'm anti-Semitic and I'm anti-Jewish and so on. And one of the things that I think is really, really troubling them is that I keep asking the question, who owns Jewishness? And I say that actually Zionists do not own Jewishness. Jewishness is something, it's not owned by anybody, but the expressions of Jewishness, Jewish experiences, history of struggle against anti-Semitism by Jews and non-Jews alike, because we all have to struggle against anti-Semitism the same way I believe we all have to struggle for justice and for Palestine. It's something that we should all aspire for, and we should be part of it if we support justice. I mean, you have to really support justice in order to do so. And so they took my words out of context, and they made it sound as if I'm actually rabid anti-Jewish, not rabid. And I'm anti-Zionist. I'm definitely anti-Zionist. I have no problem. I'm actually proud and advocate clearly. Another incident, even in this context, is that Campus Watch actually also misrepresented my words on Twitter. So they posted a tweet claiming that I'm happy about a Nazi student in my class because he said he was sympathetic to Palestine, and I gave him an A in the class. And they misquoted and misrepresented, and I twisted out of context, which also is another, let's say, trademark of the Zionists, that they try to churn up all these lies and basically made it sound as if I'm actually welcoming the Nazi. And as a matter of fact, my students were the only ones at San Francisco State who expressed concern about having a Nazi whose Facebook page and Instagram and other social media actually feature anti-Jewish, anti-Arab, anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, anti-women, anti-Black statements against refugees and so on. So it was quite concerning. And I gave an interview.
Dr. Abdulhadi, I don't mean to interrupt you, but some of our viewers are saying your voice is a little too low. So do you mind speaking up a little bit?
How is this? Is this better?
I would assume that this is better. If anyone is having trouble with sound, just let us know again, please.
Okay, thank you. So, so what happened is that I gave an interview. Is that just signal if I'm going to speak as if it's okay until you tell me I need to speak up again, okay? So, what I gave an interview to the student paper, the Golden Express, and in the paper, actually, there is a huge quote in which I say there is no place in Palestine Solidarity Movement for anybody who is anti-Semitic, racist, white supremacist, Islamophobic, homophobic, sexist. I mean, I actually name the various forms of racism, racial discrimination, hatred, and so on. And my students and I were the only ones actually who fought and basically said that this is quite concerning and that we are worried about, because what happened in 2015 in North Carolina to the 3 students who were shot point blank by somebody who posted similar messages. And then the following, in 2 weeks, actually, the Tree of Life synagogue massacre took place. So we were very concerned, but they took my words out of context and made it sound as if I'm actually sympathetic to the Nazi student, because it's also about smearing and misrepresentation. The other thing that they actually do is the character assassination, and they use Islamophobic, Orientalist, racist, misogynist tropes. And when I say they, I'm not only talking about identifiable Zionist groups, I'm talking about also administrators who are sitting with this agenda. So for example, you see a lot in Amchaz, they'll say out of control. They'll describe me as out of control. Our president of the university and my dean and several other also Zionist sites mentioned civility. They rely on the question of civility, which is also the same accusation that was used against Stephen Salaita when he was fired from his job at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. They say I'm combative. The president of the university called me, I'm too demanding. He said, when I said we really need to have our program. An administrator said that I was nagging. I mean, it's all these tropes that are used continuously in order to basically instill certain things. And the final thing I would say is the actual threats themselves. So it's aside from the Horowitz Canary Mission wanted style posters, I've received, for example, an email, and we can share it with you, that basically is quite offensive and quite insulting, but also quite scary, in the sense that it is, and this email I received right after I criticized President Wong for welcoming Zionists to campus, and also after the San Francisco State University president and the chancellor of California State University condemned me for that. Then I've received multiple death threats on my voicemail that says Muslim will die. I received in July of this past year a death threat letter that was sent to my campus mail in the College of Ethnic Studies that the writer claims to be a New York City retired detective that says to me, watch it. I'm not going to suggest violence, but you may want to watch it if you cross the street. You may want to watch it if you have an argument with somebody. You never know when things will strike. So the attacks escalate. I mean, when you're talking about incidents, it's multiple. It's an archive, and I'm sure many people around campuses and not on campuses can actually give you a whole archive of all these attacks that happen again and again and again. And the intent of it is to actually basically silence us, make us go away, threaten us, intimidate us, smear us. When they fail with things, for example, the reason they say they started resorting to this language of out of control because they've really failed in trying to establish that I'm anti-Semitic, because also I speak about the whole question of Zionism, anti-Semitism, the need to struggle against anti-Semitism. I've been supported and I've worked alongside comrades and sisters and brothers for a very long time who are from the Jewish community and other communities as well. And so that doesn't really work. So then they resort to other ways of doing it.
Thank you, Doctora. So before we continue, I just wanted to tell our viewers that you could use the chat box to ask any questions that you may have for Dr. Abdulhadi. And because we'll have some time at the end of the webinar to address those questions. Our next question is, SJP was one of the 19 community organizations that signed onto a letter in defense of Dr. Abdulhadi and her scholarship. Dr. Abdulhadi, can you tell us about the specific case at UCLA that you're facing at the moment?
Yes, thank you. This, can you hear me? Just signal that you can hear me so I don't have to tilt the computer and not have my face.
Yeah.
All right. So I think it's really, this is what UCLA, I gave a lecture. I was invited in May 2019 to give a lecture in a class of race and racism taught by Professor Keong Park, who is a leading, distinguished professor in anthropology, Asian American studies. And so I was very happy to do so. I was going to go give other lectures. So I said, this would be really great to actually be able to speak to students. And I was very excited about that because at that time I was actually, the university, San Francisco State University, used my family medical leave, family medical, to lock me out of my classes. So I was locked out of my classes. So I wasn't able to teach my course on Palestine and my other course on colonialism, imperialism, and resistance. So I welcomed the opportunity to be able to go to UCLA. I went to UCLA, I gave a lecture on Islamophobia, in which I drew parallels and comparisons between Zionism and white supremacy. I never actually said they're exactly the same. And anybody who's familiar with my scholarship knows that I don't conflate things. I always say that every context is different. So I don't like to get the quick fix and say everything, put an equal sign. I think it's much more complicated than that. But I did draw parallels, and I cited Richard Spencer, one of the organizers of Unite the Right and Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, North Carolina, in which he said on Israeli TV, I'm a white Zionist. So I was actually citing and saying that this is quite problematic. And I said that I was anti-Zionist. I traced the history of Islamophobia. I went back to discuss before 1492 in order to draw parallels between the history of the United States or North America, or the settler colonial project, if you will, in North America, in the Americas, with the 1492, the expulsion of Muslims and Jews from Spain, and the increased Islamophobia and anti-Semitism by which Muslims and Jews were actually subjected to inquisition, were forced to eat pork, were forced to abdicate their religion. And I would say, let me just say in this occasion, happy Ramadan for everybody. That starts tomorrow. And so I did all of this, and then I went into the whole history. I spoke a little bit about Ilhan Omar, because that was actually the case at that time. I spoke about what's happening against academics, and I linked all of this together. When I finished speaking, a student actually had raised their hand in the middle of the class, and I said, just let me finish, and then I will speak. I spoke, and the student was asking me a question, and in the process of asking the question, they started choking. And I'm used to it as a person who's been teaching for I don't know how many years, many, many years, since 2000. I finished my PhD in 2000, but I was also like teaching before. And so I thought maybe they were unable to express themselves, and that's why they're choking. So I waited until the student finished their question. The question was that the student felt very offended by me because I spoke against Zionism. And the student said, I'm a Zionist. And I said, I respect your opinion. I respect your view. You have the right to your opinion. I'm anti-Zionist, and I disagree with you. And this is my view. And then I was interrupted by another student who started raising their voice, speaking very loud, drowning me, not allowing me to speak, and so on. And incidentally, the whole lecture that I gave was live streamed. It's online. It's available from beginning to end, including when I was actually waiting for the students to finish. And I kept asking, do you really want me to answer the question? Now what happened, and now afterwards, I expected UCLA to issue an apology to me because their students were very offensive. They called me an abomination. They were really rude and they were not tolerant of differences of opinions. So, but then the student went and actually claimed that I was silencing them, and because I was speaking against Zionism, I was actually offensive, I was anti-Semitic, and so on. So UCLA, which is not a friend to the Palestinians, not friend to Arabs and Muslims, and so on, actually went and investigated this case. And one of the problems in the way in which UCLA did it is that what they did actually is they accepted the claim of the student instead of actually thinking, well, go see. They hadn't even seen the lecture. Then we gave them the video, and then they said, and then they actually posted part of it. And we said, no, you need to put the whole video. Let people hear everything in context. So then UCLA went and did this whole investigation and said there is nothing wrong. Rabab Abdulhadi did not engage in silencing, did not engage in anti-Semitism, did not engage in hate speech, which is, by the way, is part of the story of my life, because there have been multiple investigations at San Francisco State, for example, when AMCHA accused me of misuse of university funds. San Francisco State conducted multiple audits, and the determination that I didn't do anything wrong, but not only that, not a single question was about a penny missing or a receipt missing. It was all about political. What are you doing here? And this is the same thing again and again. Lawfare, the Zionist project, sued me, and we defeated them big time in 2018, when the judge said that just because she is anti-Zionist and supports Palestinian resistance does not make her anti-Semitic. Dismissed the case with prejudice. Of course, the Zionist groups continue to actually talk about the case and talk about it as they call it, what is it? They say that this is one of the major cases and so on. Yes, it is one of the major cases that we defeated them over. It's not one of the major cases that they actually won, but they keep using it. They keep lying again and again. In any case, with UCLA, we thought, okay, the investigation is over. But now, Stand With Us, which is a right-wing Zionist group, filed a complaint against UCLA with the Department of Education. And I believe the reason that they did this is because now the head of the Department of Education, the secretary, is Betsy DeVos. We all know how right-wing, how terrible she is. She's not even qualified to be leading education. But the head of the Civil Rights Office is none other than Kenneth Marcos, who is the founder of the Brandeis Center, which is also an ultra-right-wing Zionist group, who has been attacking groups again and again and again on campuses, and actually filing accusations against, including Rutgers University, for example, that everything was thrown out. Same thing as with AMCHA, same thing with all of them, that all of the accusations actually have been proven to be wrong. It doesn't matter because they will, first, they have a lot of resources. Secondly, they have a lot of noise. They have access to the media. We don't have the resources. We're a grassroots, volunteer-based groups. And some of us, like me, is a scholar who actually on the side is also an activist as well. So this is all of us. We don't get paid. We don't have salaries and so on. So they filed this complaint with the Department of Education. Department of Education has now said that they're going to investigate. I really need to say that this is not just happening at UCLA. Columbia University, New York University. Kenneth Marcus went after Rutgers again. University of North Carolina and Duke University, the Consortium on Middle East Studies, they're basically going after all of these everywhere. And at UCLA now, the letter you're talking about that NSJP had signed is a letter initiated by CAIR, Council on American Islamic Relations, that has investigated actually. CAIR has done an investigation in May. Palestine Legal has written about it. Many people have written, Electronic Intifada. A lot of people have written about it because it was clearly a clear lie, but it was carried on. And so UCLA now is being the subject of an investigation over this case, my lecture on Islamophobia, as well as the National Conference of the Students for Justice in Palestine that took place in November 2018 at UCLA, which you mentioned I was a keynote at. And I saw the Zionist students running around, actually even speaking to us in broken Arabic, because maybe they were soldiers at checkpoints in the Israeli military and so on. But it was really, really scary. I mean, what happened at UCLA, and it was a student group that wanted to have a conference, and a lot of the stuff is also concocted. A lot is lies, as you know, from the Al Jazeera 4-part series, The Lobby, that was censored by Al Jazeera, but Electronic Intifada got a copy of it and posted it, that Zionist groups do not have any qualms about making up avatars on Facebook, do not have a problem in putting words in our mouth that we did not say, do not have any qualms misrepresenting us or misquoting us. And part of it is because they are so desperate. They are so desperate to crush us with all their might and all their resources, and they're trying to basically silence and drown the voice of Palestine, the same way that the Zionist students tried to drown my voice at UCLA. And we are fighting it. We're coordinating with other universities around the country. We're talking with everybody, because this is simply another example of McCarthyism, is to try to intimidate, to basically ruin our careers, attack us in order for us to go away. And we're not. So thank you, NSJP and everybody else. And the case continues, by the way.
Thank you so much for that, Dr. Abdulhadi. Just a quick follow-up to that before we go into our next question. You mentioned a lot about the importance of your work and how many have tried to silence and stop the work that you're doing, and they reached severe methods. How is that playing? How does your work here in the United States play a role in fighting and resisting settler colonialism as a whole?
Yes, I think one of the things that we are trying to do is, and I think this is also part of the attacks. Part of the attacks is to really prevent the institutionalization of the Ahmed Studies program, for example, at San Francisco State. I was brought in 2007 to build this program, but when I came to San Francisco State, I had already been at the University of Michigan, Dearborn. Before that, I was at NYU for 3 years, and before that, I was at American University in Cairo. And before I went to school, actually, in 1992, I have been a long-time community activist and organizer, involved with multiple groups working together around the concept that I think of as the indivisibility of justice, that you cannot apply justice for Palestine without actually thinking about gender and sexual justice, without thinking about labor justice, without thinking about justice for the immigrants, without thinking about the whole question of justice for Black youth who are being murdered every single day of the police, or people who do not have access to healthcare or to housing or to the environmental proper environment and so on. So I have been working all my life with that. And of course, this is my views. This is what I've been doing. And when I went to the academy, I took my views with me as well. And to be very frank with you, and you haven't asked me about it, but I'll say it. Actually, the reason I went and earned a PhD and my degrees, my BA, my MPhil, MA, MPhil, and PhD, is because I used to always be organizing. I used to go always be involved in educational activities and so on. And sometimes people would not take me seriously because I was an activist. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm going to go and get the DR in front of my name, because then people may actually pay attention and listen. And they do listen. Unfortunately, there is indigenous knowledge in the community that oftentimes is not acknowledged, is not recognized. And this is one of the things that the Ahmed Studies program does. We actually engage with the community. We actually feel that we are in a partnership. We feel that we have to be accountable to the community. What we are doing, we're living in the spirit of 68. The spirit of 68 refers to the strike by the Black Student Union, Third World Liberation Front, and multiple over, I think 800 people were arrested. The strike grew to 2,000 people, and then thousands and thousands supported them in 1968, who demanded decolonizing the curriculum, demanded that the community and the university come together, demanded that the university become one site for struggling for a different way of knowledge, for indigenous knowledge. That's why we say the praxis. They demanded that everybody should be able to receive education, and education should not only be limited. Education is a right. I mean, we do know that from even the collective and rights at the United Nations, social and collective rights. The education is one of the rights. Education is not a privilege. It should not be limited to people who only can pay for their tuition and so on. So this is one of the things we've done. So for the program, the Ahmed Studies program, what we do, let me just say other things that we do open classrooms where we actually always engage the community, the activists, the scholars, the public intellectuals, artists, people who do multiple things, poets and so on. We always come together or always around the particular issue and discuss it from different perspectives. And sometimes we show films and we discuss them, and we always never ever say that we have the final word, because every single class we finish, it's going to lead to another conversation. It's going to leave us with so many more questions than we started with. But this is the way knowledge is. This is the critique. This is what using justice-centered knowledge production means. So we do that. We also have the minor, the academic minor, which Saida spoke about, which all our classes are always applicable to the university and so on. We also have the delegations to Palestine, that there have been multiple delegations from 2011. Before I led delegation, actually my first academic delegation was in summer of 2001. I took my students at the American University in Cairo to Beirut to visit with and meet with survivors of the Sabra and Shatila massacre, and to meet with the children. We visited Ain al-Hilwa refugee camp. We went to Saida. We went to the south of Lebanon to Bawabat Fatma's Gate. We were, and the way we did it, and this is when you're asking, how do we do this? The way we do it is that I did not, even though I'm a Palestinian from Nablus. And even if I were from a refugee camp in the West Bank or in Gaza, I don't assume that I actually should have open access. I believe that we should really always go through gatekeepers, people who are from the community. And I think sometimes people say gatekeepers in a negative way, but in this sense, I think it's an affirmation of self-determination of the community. So I actually contacted Lebanese colleagues that I have met. I've contacted Rosemary Sayer. I've contacted multiple people around, and I said, I would really like to go to Shatila first to actually interview survivors of the massacre. And my question at that time was, I hadn't finished my PhD yet. My question was, how do Palestinian refugees feel as a result of the Oslo process that dealt them out? Because if you remember, until maybe the year 2000 or so, their discussion around Palestinian refugees was about maybe giving $100,000, maybe letting some refugees go in and other refugees not going in. I'm talking about a Palestinian discourse, not only an international one. So I wanted to actually ask these questions because I hadn't had a chance in my dissertation to be able to go to refugee camps, because I was limited to the West Bank, Gaza, and the 1948 areas, and the diaspora, but not in Lebanon, for example. So I wanted to go, so I met people, and then we went together with my students, and we met, and we had the people meeting with us, Palestinian activists, and leader in Shatila, and so on. We wanted to also sort of like trace the people who were involved, the young children who were involved in my Masri's film that brings children of Shatila and Heyshe at the border on the south of Lebanon, after the south of Lebanon was liberated in 2000 as a result of resistance. Israel actually had to withdraw. So that was my first delegation, but I also, since we had the 2011 Indigenous and Women of Color, feminist delegation, 2014, the academic and labor delegation, 2016 was the US anti-prison academic and labor delegation. And then we actually changed the format to actually think about officially, maybe thinking about how do we bring the classroom along with the question of the delegations, along with, and the delegations were always also, I should say, it's about sort of critical solidarity. The delegations were not about somebody just going there bleary-eyed, you know, and then say, oh, this is, I saw, I come, I witnessed, which I think there is a place for that in Palestine solidarity, but this is not what we were engaged in. We wanted to engage in critical solidarity. So the prisoners from the US were meeting with the freed Palestinian prisoners, and they were engaging with each other. What does prison abolition mean? What does it mean to talk about social prisoners? What does it mean to talk about political prisoners? What kind of mobilization could you do? In Palestine, prisoners are revered. In the US, prisoners, political prisoners or otherwise, are sometimes isolated, except in our communities that are demanding, and today we demand freedom all prisoners. But it was a critical solidarity aspect. So we thought, why don't we put all of this stuff together and also try to begin to basically, if you see on the screen, this is the pamphlet that the US prisoners created in solidarity with Palestinian prisoners. It has multiple people in it, including, for example, David Gilbert, who is now in the north of New York City, who people are really demanding freedom for him. And this pamphlet was created, then we actually sent it by email to Birzeit University. We were working with the Institute for Women's Studies at Birzeit. They translated it to Arabic, published 500 pamphlets, and then they gave it to us because we couldn't send it, we couldn't carry it. We didn't want to take it with us in our bags. And we actually, every time we met with Palestinian prisoners, we will take it with us, and then people will see the solidarity that was going on. So when we did Teaching Palestine, the capital T, capital P project, this was the picture of the delegation from 2016. But when we did that in 2016, right around the same time, it was in order for multiple ways. One is to think about, not to think about the occupation as only beginning in 67. Because if you recall, everybody was planning for 2017 as the 50th anniversary of the occupation. And I was one of the people who was really, really concerned about the need to shift the discourse. So you can't just talk about 50 years of occupation. You have to talk about 100 years of Balfour. You have to talk about 70 years of the Nakba. You have to talk about the partition. You have to talk about Deir Yassin. You have to talk about 10 years of the blockade of Gaza. You have to talk about maybe 35th anniversary of the Sabra and Shatila massacre, and so on and so forth. And we wanted to also ask is, why is it that we commemorate anniversaries? What does this mean? How could we shift the discourse? What does it mean to commemorate anniversaries? And how can we bring together the anniversaries, let's say in Palestine, the history of Palestine, with the history of the United States? Most relevant to us was the 50th anniversary of the 68 strike at San Francisco State, because it demanded decolonizing the curriculum, because it refused to submit to the will of the university and continue striking, the longest strike in the history. I mean, they won. They didn't get exactly what they wanted, but they won. They wanted the College of Third World Studies. They got the College of Ethnic Studies, which unfortunately today remains the only college in the world in ethnic studies, which is, it's not really, it's just like, for me, I'm one person faculty member. That's not really something to be proud of. It's actually it's a problem when you have tokenism. You really need to expand and expand and expand. Anyway, so we shifted thinking about, so what do these anniversaries bring together? What does it mean to think about one point of history and see what was happening in different places? The third worldism, conversations, discussions. Was only the May 68 at Columbia the most important one? Was the free speech at Berkeley? Even was San Francisco State? Can we think about what happened in Senegal? Can we think about what happened in Tunisia? Can we think about what was going in Palestine? For me, for example, one of the most exciting, well, not, it was sad at the time, but now to think about it, the memory, is that that's when I learned about Che Guevara. Che Guevara died and was killed in 1968, and the Sheikh Imam and Ahmed Fuad Nijam, two Egyptian poets, wrote a song about him, Guevara Mad, Guevara Mad. And I learned about it from one of my cousins who was involved in Palestinian movement and so on. And so if we bring this, and this knowledge is not known, this knowledge is these narratives are basically completely erased, untold. So if we think about that, if we think in 1968, that this was the time of the largest organization of Arab students, organization of Arab students in the US that was quite active This was also at the same time when the Iranian Studies Association was very active. The Vietnamese students were very active. There was all of this stuff that actually does not come out day in and day out. I think this is, when you're thinking about how do we resist, how do we speak up, how do we actually create justice-centered knowledge? How do we think about it? And it's not really contriving and saying, oh, somebody resisted here or there, because actually there is all these narratives that always get covered by narratives of submission, subjugation, and defeat that colonial narratives, Zionists try to propagate because it is in their best interest to signal to the people who are fighting that you are defeated, don't even think about it, and to signal to everybody else who's in solidarity with the people who are struggling, it's not worth it. Don't even go and support them. This is something that you shouldn't be doing, and so on. So actually, by coming together, we are building a new solidarity. We're learning from lessons of history. We're not saying everybody needs to follow the same formulas. People who are struggling today are struggling. They have different modalities, different ways, different leadership, and so on. But I think this intergenerational conversation, I think our discussions with each other, our debates, thinking about it. One of the things I really love about being in Palestinian spaces, and I'm not saying it's exclusive and exceptional, because I don't believe we're exceptional. But I think one of the things that I really, really love, that we come, we debate, we argue with each other, and then we go home, and afterwards we sit down and we have tea with each other, we talk with each other. This happened to me last year at the Palestinian Women's Conference in Nablus, and I was, very strong. I'm very strongly against Oslo, and there were people who were Palestinian Authority participating and so on. We all had these debates, and it's okay. Afterwards, one of the people who was the spokespeople Jihad, Intisar Wazir, she said to me, "Are you coming to lunch?" Immediately, she made sure that and so this keeps repeated again and again. And I think this is one of the lessons that we actually can instill, that we don't have to all agree with each other. We don't all have to have consensus. We don't all have to say, okay, we're all singing the same tune. We actually can disagree, and that's how knowledge develops and advances.
Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it. Can you elaborate a little bit about how, or can you explain if you ever felt the need to stay silent regarding your work or positioning on Palestine in a specific space or settings due to your concerns of being targeted?
Yes, I felt the need, but I didn't act on it. I really believe in what I'm talking about. I believe in the indivisibility of justice. I believe in a dialectical relationship between scholarship, pedagogy, and advocacy. I do not believe that advocates are less than academics, but I have experienced a lot of pressures, and I can just share with you some of the incidents of the pressures that I have experienced. For example, let me make sure that I have my notes, because I don't forget what I want to say. So, for example, and I have as a scholar, I'm a scholar at San Francisco State University, and one of the things that I've mentioned in 2014, for example, the AMCHA initiative basically claimed that I misused university funds, public funds, taxpayers' money, to take a delegation to Palestine to meet, quote unquote, with terrorists, because they wanted to single out 2 Palestinians out of the 189 people that we've met with, and basically delegitimize the use of public funds for this kind of knowledge, this kind of education, right? So they wanted, okay, so it's okay. And the person who actually waged the campaign, Tammy Rothman Benjamin, who is the executive director now at AMCHA, at the time she was co-founder with another woman, she actually wrote a chapter in a book in which she targeted ethnic studies, and she said that actually the anti-Semitism arose along with the 1968 strike, along with the Black Panther Party, along with the College of Ethnic Studies, along with the Ahmed Studies program, and so on. So what happened then, I told you there were multiple audits of me. And then after she failed, she went to the state controller of the state of California. And after that, the provost revoked my trip to Palestine. I was going to go to Palestine to participate with Al-Qaus in a summer school on figuring out, devising an Arabic language discourse on sexuality. So it was amazing. We did it in December, but I couldn't go that summer in 2014 because the provost revoked my travel. For example, there is pressure on me to throw students under the bus. In 2013, I was pressured to throw the GUPS, General Union of Palestine students, under the bus and abandon them. And I said, no, I'm not going to abandon them. And then in 2016, around when the students, all the students went and protested the visit to campus by Nir Barakat, the former racist mayor of occupied Jerusalem, who was coming to speak on campus. The university president himself actually kept saying, you really need to talk to GUPS. And I said, why do you want me to talk to GUPS? He said, people will support Ahmed studies. And I said, people in the community love GUPS. They love the students. They support the students. They've worked with the students all along. I said, no. I'm not talking about Arabs or Muslims. And I'm saying, very interesting. I mean, you want to actually basically bribe me to accept. It sounded to me later on, the Bahrain workshop came up by Jared Kushner, and they couldn't get Palestinians to go and participate or sell out. It was the same thing. It's kind of like, would you talk to the students? And if you are able to silence the students, and of course he proceeded to use the word civility and all sorts of things against the students, and to single out Palestinian students, because actually that was a complete engagement by multiple students from all sorts of background. So there was pressure on me, and I said, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to abandon it. And as a result, this was 2016, we were engaged in the big movement called Defend and Advance Ethnic Studies on campus. And actually it was the number one demand of the students was the Ahmed studies. That was really funding and supporting Ahmed studies, reinstating our faculty lines, basically giving us support and so on. And the students insisted, and actually the knowledge, the awareness for the students was so vast that they even expressed, they had banners expressing solidarity with the Palestinian teachers who were on strike. I mean, this is how amazing this movement was. So they threw this monkey wrench at us, the Nir Barakat thing. And as a result of that, actually the president of the university went and apologized to Nir Barakat again, re-invited him to campus, even after he found out. And I mentioned to him in my meeting, I said, President Wong, would you bring a neo-Nazi to campus? Would you bring KKK to campus? Why would you have somebody who's actually known to be a right-wing racist, Islamophobe, slings a machine gun, goes around Jerusalem saying on video, kill Arabs? And I mean, why would you even host him? And so after that, he refused. The president actually refused any support for the Ahmed studies. And afterwards, when there was an agreement reached and so on, basically we suffered as a result. The same thing happened with the Know Your Right. So this is just pressuring me to abandon students, and I refuse to do that. There has also been pressure about, for example, the lawfare lawsuit. It was a major lawsuit, which I mentioned, 2017, that I was sued along with the university and the California State University. And I think part of the aspect of it is to pressure the university to abandon us. It's the same objectives of new McCarthyism. McCarthyist style tactics is that make the person smear, attack, intimidate, threaten their livelihood and so on. And then if all else fails, you sue them in court. And then the cost of suing becomes so big that the university says, okay, you know what, we're going to abandon, even if they were sort of like somewhat okay around the question of Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians, or the need for something like the Ahmed Studies program, given the low bar on which this country basically treats Islamophobia, anti-Arab discrimination, anti-Palestinian hostility, and so on. They're not going to do it. And actually in the lawsuit, we discovered that one of the major foundations in San Francisco, Correct Foundation, offered either 1.5 or 1.7 million dollars to the university, and then took it back because they did not feel that the university sanctioned Palestinian students enough over the Nir Barakat protest. Now, mind you, the university hired an investigator, independent investigator, who did an investigation and published a report on September 7th, along the same day that a report came out about UC Irvine, and the same report that came out about CUNY graduates, CUNY students that are responding to claims of anti-Semitism and threat to Jewish students and so on. Every single report came out saying this is not the case. This was not against Jewish students. There was nothing about Jewish students. There was no violence involved. This was against this, they call it the mayor, and this was anti-Israel protest. This was not about that. But this is continued, so now it raises the cost of what does it mean to have this. So, but at the end of the day, I'm also being pressured by the university campus watch, the big campaign in 2016, demanding that the university ends its collaboration with Al-Najah National University and targeting me. There's multiple tweets, you can look them up. It's very interesting, and it's all happened, like we can see a line in 2016. There was a big line in 2013, 2014, because we were just about to institutionalize Ahmed studies. We were just about to submit the minor proposal for approval, the courses for general education and so on. We've succeeded in that. Then we proceeded to have the Edward Said Scholarship and to do the MIU with Al-Najah. In 2016, we were actually in the middle of the Defend and Advance Ethnic Studies. There was so much support. The students were all in sync with each other and so on. And then everything started shifting and the attack increases more and more. So Campus Watch attacks the MOU with Al-Najah. And the thing is that the university could not cancel the MOU with Al-Najah, but that's the reason why it remains one only, instead of actually having multiple and so on. And lastly, I would say, well, two more points is the pressure is actually pressuring me around teaching Palestine. So Ahmed courses have been canceled. For example, the Edward Said course was canceled last year. The trip, I told you about revoking my trips multiple times. They refused to reimburse. They actually revoked my travel authorization to go to South Africa. On a conference we were coordinating with AMIC, Afro-Middle East Center, with the University of Johannesburg, with Al-Najah, on a conference on teaching Palestine. And then now they refuse to reimburse me for that. They've canceled the Palestinian mural course multiple times. And then they also canceled the Study Abroad to Palestine, the project that we've actually came out with, which was a new rendition of teaching Palestine, bringing delegation, bringing students after we all prepared. I prepared, my students prepared, they went and got passports. Not everybody has passport. They got permission from their families, they arranged their financial aid. And when we were going to do it, they went and canceled it. And it was, we felt that they were going to attack it from the beginning. The last thing I would say in terms of repression is the death threats that I've been experiencing, and I mentioned them, I shared them.
Sorry, Dr. Abdulhadi, I'm sorry for interrupting. We just have to move on to our final question before we proceed to the question and answer section.
Okay. So this will be the last question before we go back into the question and answer segment of this webinar. So Dr. Abdulhadi, you've personally faced a slew of different attacks over the past few years, from lawfare organizations, universities, and etc., for your scholarship and activism about Palestine. Can you speak to the systemic nature of these attacks beyond your individual case and the collective attempt to silence Palestinian professors in particular?
Yes, I think it's, this is actually, when we were talking about the UCLA, that was a perfect example. Because let's say, for example, well, there is the very well-known case of Stephen Salaita, which I've mentioned before, who was fired from his job at University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. And he was fired over the use of his own personal phone to tweet personal messages, exercising his freedom of speech. Everybody talks about academic freedom and so on. So that was serious, and he lost his job. He lost his livelihood. That's one thing. The other thing today, the case against Columbia, for example, and I mentioned the UCLA and Department of Education. The case of the Columbia, at the center of it is the accusation of Professor Joseph Mas'ad, whom the Barry Weiss, none other than Barry Weiss, and writer for the New York Times, actually tried to stop his tenure and they also tried to stop the tenure of Professor Nadia Abul-Hajj at Barnard at the time. Now both are tenured and senior professors, but now they're coming back after NSJP and Students for Justice in Palestine, as well at Columbia University. There is this attack that's happening around the Department of Education, because I believe that they've tried everything that is going on. There is also the stuff that I've talked about, that I've mentioned. For example, it's not just applying to me. I know that it's happening to a lot of professors. I'm constantly contacted by my colleagues, and I hear things. Sometimes people speak up, sometimes people don't speak up, but stuff is happening every single day. There is this intimidation, this smearing, trying to present us as controversial. As I mentioned, for me, they try to, and basically I'm affecting my academic career as they're doing it around other people. Junior scholars, students, graduate students, careers are being torpedoed because Canary Mission, and I think you've asked a question about that, Yasmin, when we were conversing earlier. And so Canary Mission publishes that list specifically to prevent people from getting hired, from getting positions. Actually, Canary Mission posted the names of our students who participated in the Near Barakat protest. And then afterwards, they called one of the students' jobs and asked them to fire that student. And then after the posting of their names on the Canary mission, they've started receiving calls of sexual threats. I mean, this is the stuff that is going on. It's not, I think sometimes we don't realize the extent of it because we only hear about the public things that get written publicly. But if you hear about it day in and day out, jobs are being threatened. What happened is that people apply, let's say for a sabbatical or for a leave, they don't get it. People apply for rewards, they don't get it. You ask for feedback, you never receive the feedback. Somehow, all of a sudden, your colleagues start treating you as if you're radioactive and so on, because they also don't want their jobs to be affected as well. This is also the byproduct of repression and McCarthyism. This is something that's been tried again and again and again by management, by institutions that are following a particular agenda. I'm not saying that every single institution in the US is following the agenda, the Zionist agenda, but what is happening is that they coexist with it. At the very least, at best, they coexist with it. And if you combine that with the existence of Islamophobia, with the low bar, people don't recognize the discrimination against Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians as discrimination. I mean, you actually really need to sit down and educate and explain, and people say, aha, now we understand what's going on. So if you put all of this stuff together, you have a very, very intimidating environment of bullies who continue bullying, because bullies do not just accept and just go away. Every single time they lose, and as I mentioned, and we can have courses on this, we can have dissertations on this, how does this extend and expand and so on. Basically, they really would like to stop people, they would like people to go away. And what I'm saying is that this is why it's really, really important today not to allow that to happen. I will just mention one more thing about Colombia, because there had been, I think last week and this week, there is this quote unquote movement by 70 professors at Columbia University that's very interesting, fits exactly with the Department of Education investigation. So the Department of Education, so now we have the Zionists who filed a complaint against Columbia University. Department of Education is investigating it. Now we found so-called 70 professors at Columbia University send a letter to the president of Columbia congratulating him for suppressing Students for Justice in Palestine and the BDS. Now, it's very interesting because if you dig deeper, you find out that the person who is the executive director is none other than a professor in the Maxwell School at Syracuse University that in February actually tried to block my lecture in collaboration with a right-wing outfit called Campus Reform. Okay, it goes further. The person who founded the American Engagement Network is none other than Mark Yudof, who is the former chancellor of the University of California and also former professor of law at UC Berkeley. And so they founded this in order to undermine any possibilities. So it is not, so when they even say, they say that, oh, this is Jewish students who are being affected and so on. It's not really all the Jewish students, number one. And actually there is multiple studies by Stanford University, by Brandeis University itself, that actually says that Jewish students do not, majority of them, 80% do not feel uncomfortable on campus because somebody says that Zionism is racism. You know, you can say Zionism is racism, and they can also go, and they do go and organize for Israel Day. They organize for all sorts of things. They have tons of money, they have tons of support, and so on and so forth. So it's actually not true, but it is like a threat to smear people because, of course, because of the horrors of the Holocaust, because of the horrors of anti-Semitism and so on. If you accuse somebody of anti-Semitism, people will be afraid. So they rely on the fact that people do not know, which is why it is really important for professors to teach about Palestine. It's really important for us to speak up. It's important for us to not stay within only the university compounds. It's important for us to support student activism and to be able to actually exchange experiences and work with each other in order to prevent these attacks.
Great, thank you so much, Dr. Abdulhadi. We're gonna move into some of the questions that we've gotten through the webinar, the live stream. So the first question we'll be addressing is Rami Abu Faraj I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. What provocative approaches, what proactive approaches can or are being taken to counter these challenges, Zionist repression? The same reactive tactics are clearly not working anymore. So what new proactive approaches can be taken?
Okay, well, with all my due respect to Rani.
And I'm sorry, but just before we start,
are there other questions that's similar to this? Because if they're all, we can maybe take them together.
Yes, so we collected a few questions that we feel are similar. So we're trying to dedicate at least 3 minutes to each question.
All right. So with all due respect, I don't think what we've been doing all failed. I think we need more. We need more organizing. I think what we really need more is we need to coordinate with each other more. I think we need to speak with each other more. I think when people say we should not preach to the converted, I don't think that's actually a warranted statement, because we need to define who is the converted, and then ask if the converted are really converted. Are they really converted? Are we all thinking the same way? 3, I think it's also the whole question of kind of like coming up with the lowest common denominator and making the message to the Joe Schmo or the Joe the plumber or something like this, or the summit, the beer summit that Obama held with Skip Gates and the Boston cop who asked him what was he doing in Boston when he was going into his own apartment because he's a black man. And so I think that I don't think we should actually accept any assumptions. I think we really need to think, we need to be critical. We need to engage with each other. We need to learn. I think it's really, really important to learn from history, and not only learn lessons. I think we need to also learn the history. I think we need to, how are we telling the narrative about Palestine? What sort of narrative we're telling? What's the message that we're putting out there? Are we advocating for the message about justice in for Palestine as part and parcel of the indivisibility of justice? Are we saying something different about that? So I think that's, and I want to also acknowledge that it's really, really important for us to remember that we are not in a place where we actually could make any choices we can, whether here or in Palestine or anywhere else. I began by talking about COVID-19 as a symptom, an exposure of the inequalities. So I think we need to, and a lot of people sometimes say, oh, you know, all the Arabs need, all the Palestinians need is to actually create another AIPAC. And sometimes they say Jewish lobby. And I have very, very big problem with that, because there is no such thing as one Jewish lobby. There is a pro-Israel lobby, for sure. But they cannot say the Jewish lobby, because this actually lends credence to the Zionist argument that they represent all Jews, but that's not the case. And actually that's an insult to our Jewish sisters and brothers. And secondly is that a lobby, so what you're going to do with it? You're going to go to Congress people who actually are financed and bankrolled, mainly by a lot of donations and so on. So you're actually saying that money talks, and we are going to have more money to make things happen and so on. And we know that doesn't really work. First of all, on a basic level, we don't have those resources. But secondly, you don't buy justice. Actually, you struggle for it. You educate day in and day out. I think one of the things we're doing on campuses is really the most important thing. And this is why we also are targeted, because the mind is a very dangerous thing. And I think the right wing, and this is why the right wing is also jumping on it. It's not just a Zionist, it's also the right wing attack, because the right wing lost a lot in the 60s movements. There has been a change. There has a shift in thinking. There has a shift in discourses. And so when Reagan came to power in 1980, one of the major agendas was to actually instill a new right-wing agenda that becomes the status quo. This is why he was targeting quote unquote political correctness. This is why all of this stuff was going on. So I think it's really, really important for us to think about how is it that we are going to connect with each other? How are we going to actually salvage and protect and defend every single place we have where we are teaching, we are studying, we are engaging, we're working with the communities, we are respecting indigenous knowledge, we're respecting the elders in the community, we are not privileging one thing over the other. I think we just need to do that better. And I think we need to connect and learn also from Palestine and so on. I think we have a very big task in the US because of all the issues that I've mentioned, and because this is the premier settler colonial state. I mean, it's very, very hard to actually try to defy that. Yesterday, I heard of a debate on Zionism and anti-Semitism at the Forward. One of the Zionist advocate said, what do they want? They want to change America. And I'm saying, yeah, yes, that is one of the things that we would want to do. So I think there is a lot of things that we actually need to collaborate and coordinate with each other. And we can discuss details maybe in some other time.
Okay, great. So here we have Olivia Hazen. I feel there's a lot of divisiveness among pro-Palestinian activists. How do we go about making sure that we as people stick together and support one another when we are condemned? And Shuruk Josting added to that, how can we connect and expand the struggle across borders, continents, and continents even?
I think they're very good questions and they connect with each other. I want to first say that I don't like the term pro-Palestinian. I don't like that term because I don't think it's pro-Palestinian, because when you say pro-Palestinian, what do you really mean? Which Palestine you're talking about? Which Palestinian you're talking about? There is multiple perspectives in the Palestinian political community, Palestinian society, historically and contemporarily. I always say I am pro-justice and for Palestine. And I always say in and for Palestine because I'm not only struggling to end Israeli colonialism, racism, and occupation. I am also struggling to have a different set of relations within our community that actually exemplifies justice, the indivisibility of justice. So I don't think that we can actually unite. I don't think the unity is a possibility. I think it is an impossible goal that I don't think we can achieve. And I think that's okay though. I think it's okay for us to have different perspectives, to agree and disagree and struggle with each other. Now, I do want to say something about, like, reverse myself a little bit when I say pro-Palestine, because pro-Palestinian is different than pro-Palestine, especially if we think of Palestine as a signifier of justice. If we think of Palestine as a reproduction, another model, which this Zionist guy yesterday was saying at the forward debate, that it's the Palestinian entity is going to be a modeling of Israel, another nation state that actually models all of it. I don't want that. I'm not struggling for that. I am actually struggling to undo social relations, political relations, cultural relations. I am struggling to have justice, and I'm saying people like all of us, we're in the way we share when we share this politics and so on. And this is for which Palestinians have struggled for over 100 years. It was never, ever against Jews. It was never, ever, as the Zionists say from time immemorial, Jewish, Arab, Jewish, Palestinian. So actually, historically, that's quite inaccurate anyway. But also, so when we think about if Palestine is a signifier of justice, because it is about justice for all and about all sorts of justices and so on, I think then we can move to the whole question of how do we connect? And I want to say that I don't support that kind of like, okay, the approach of we reach out to other communities or we go to their event, they come to ours. I don't think this is the kind of relationship we have. If we think about the indivisibility of justice, it means we are thinking about a broader framework for struggling against injustices that we can enter in from our own locations, in our own historical context, according to time and place, not ahistorical. So what people struggled in 1936-39 revolt are not the same thing that people are struggling over today. Boycott at one location does not necessarily mean exactly the same modalities of boycott in another. I think we agree on the principles and then we see the struggle. We actually recognize that indigenous communities who are actually suffering today from COVID-19 more than other communities, or Black and brown communities who are actually suffering as a result, or Palestinians who are suffering, we actually recognize and acknowledge how there are similarities, but they're not exactly the same. So I don't want to use the short catchphrases and say, yes, it's all the same. It's not all the same. But I think if we think of ourselves, that we feel the pain, the suffering, and we also celebrate the victories of people who, for example, at Mauna Kea, when I visited them, they were actually holding camp in a street and actually resorting to everything from legal to people's movement, to blockading in their home, to home, to food, to trying to kind of have different kind of relations and so on. For me, it was an amazing example that resembled what I read, the accounts I read. I was too young. I mean, I used to hear about them, but I didn't experience them myself, of Palestinian camps in 1960s in Jordan or in Beirut. I mean, this is the kind of like you sit around and you hear this kind of discussion and you say, have you ever been to Palestine? No. When we went last month, we did this big, in February, we did this big event on Black Palestinian solidarity. And we brought in people who signed the 1970 statement in the New York Times. And the majority of the people who spoke have never ever met a Palestinian. They didn't do it because they met Palestinians. They actually went, whether it was the 68 strikers, the Black Student Union, Third World Liberation Front, the Black Panthers, whether it was the former chair of SNCC, who actually was the chair, Phil Hutchins, when they signed the statement in support of Palestine, whether it was Fran Beal, who was the founder of Third World Women's Alliance, also very active in SNCC and so on. Fran Beal said that she met people in Paris, studying in Paris. She actually met Algerians who were struggling against French colonialism. And that's how she learned about it. One of our members, Terry Collins, said, oh, actually, I was in my city and I met all these Jews who were saying that the Zionist collaboration with South Africa is right-wing fascism and so on. So people come from different perspectives and understand things differently. And I think we really need to learn and teach and study and examine and talk with each other and understand what's going on. And I'm not talking about idealizing the 60s. I'm not talking about idealizing the past or idealizing any of our experiences. There are a lot of important experiences that come from the elders. There is a lot of experiences that are going on today. And I think we need to try everything together, bring it together and figure out how do we go about it. The final thing I would say, I think it's really important to recognize that there are borders. And I just want to mention one example in the sense that we want to dissolve borders, colonial borders, because they're all colonial. They're drawn by colonialism. Actually, none of us sat down and created these borders. But there is also a sense of self-determination over your own community. So when people say marginalized community, we need a space where we can sit and discuss with each other. That's not necessarily a border we want to dissolve now. We want to dissolve it strategically. But in the meantime, actually people need to come together and be able to talk with each other. And sometimes the discussions we have in Arabic are not the same discussions we're having in English. And I think we need to also recognize that. Sometimes the discussions we have about among a number of Palestinian Americans, for example, or Palestinian youth in a refugee camp, or Palestinian member in a particular place and so on, are not, they might not be in Arabic, they might be in another language or whatever, but I'm using Arabic in this particular sense, not as a language of oppression, but as a language of resistance. To think about that, we need these spaces, we need to hold them, but also we cannot only engage in identity politics and say, this is it. We have something special, we are exceptional because we are Palestinians. No, we actually have access to an amazing experience of oppression and resistance that we need to use in order for us to build the indivisibility of justice, not in order for us to treat ourselves as exceptional, because we don't want to reproduce the same model that Israel or the United States or South Africa or other settler colonial regimes or oppressive regimes do. We have to do something totally different and totally liberatory and emancipatory.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi. So the last question we have that was posed by Sarah, we're going to connect that to some action items that you could possibly provide for some of our viewers here. So it says, Dr. Abdulhadi, how can people support your individual cause?
Okay, I'm not, okay, so let's just say it's not individual. I just want to say that it's not my individual. I actually do have, I have conflicts sometimes because one of the problems is that I'm at the center of this campaign. And at the same time, for somebody else, I would have so much more courage and so much more boldness to go for it. But it's really weird because historically, I've actually did not work on my campaigns. I worked on other people's campaigns. So I don't see it as personal property of Rabab Abdulhadi. I see this as something that I have standing. I'm the only faculty member in the Ahmed Studies program. I'm the only one who built this program. I feel that I don't really have the luxury to actually walk away because this is it. If I walk away, not only the program will be demolished, but it might even be completely unrecognizable to what we wanted to build to start with, right? When I came to be hired in 2007, and when the community and the students and people who are our community actually supported me, whether it is Arabs, Muslims, and Palestinians, whether it is the anti-Zionist Jews in San Francisco, whether it's the people of color, I mean, they supported this particular vision. And so I feel that I have the standing to fight this campaign and so on. And I have to speak up and I have to speak truth to power. And I have to actually represent what our students want, what our community wants and so on. And if I don't agree, I debate with people and so on. So I think what we are doing right now, we are actually, let's say we're fighting multiple levels of kind of like the Zionist corporatized university alliance. And one of my major goals is to actually hold San Francisco State accountable. San Francisco State has departed and walked very, very far from the social justice mission that the spirit of 68, the 68 strikers, Black Student Union, Third World Liberation Front fought for and tried to accomplish. And I was inspired. That's why I went to San Francisco State. I was inspired by the spirit of 68. So I'm sticking with the program. I have not received the memo that the program has been changed, and now we are supposed to change everything to make it neoliberal, corporatized, and so on. So it's really, really important. So I'm actually suing San Francisco State University with 2 cases in state court of California and in federal court. I also have a grievance, and actually the union, my union is amazing, and my union is representing me. We have grievances. We're actually going to level 2 now. We are no longer only on the campus. We're actually, now the union is representing me with the California State University. And we are demanding, because my demands are actually also reflective of my colleagues and also reflected of the quest for justice in for Palestine. So we will need people to be supportive of the campaign. We need people to actually speak up. We need people to ask San Francisco State. For example, last week, they canceled 3 lecturer courses that are all of Ahmed, that are all about Arab Muslims or Palestinians, including the Palestinian course, mural course. And I was very alarmed by it, because under the guise of the whole storm, and we all need to deal with COVID and so on, and we're supposedly equal in it, the courses are getting canceled. And actually that's really, really very, and also it's denying the lecturers their livelihood. So you can think about it from multiple ways. And I'm always cautioning myself and everyone else that we should not only pick one thing to focus on, we really need to think about all of this together. So we need people to support. We need people to understand that this case is multifaceted. We need to bring San Francisco State to be accountable to the public, because it's a public university, not to the donors that are funding it privately, secretly, behind everybody's back and so on. We just needed to be the public university that we all signed up to be part of, and build the Ahmed Studies program. Because honestly, how are we going to educate the campus community? How are we going to educate people? How are we going to be able to teach Palestine, to support Palestine, to link up with other people for the indivisibility of justice?
Okay, well, on behalf of NSJP, I would like to thank you, Dr. Abdulhadi, for being present here and answering our questions. And thank you, Yasmin, also for being a part of this initiative.
Yeah,
we would just like.
Thank you for the National Students for Justice in Palestine for having us and making sure that I have space to ask my questions to Dr. Rabab Abdulhadi. And thank you, Doctor, so much for giving us your time. We really appreciate you.
Thank you.
Of course, no problem. And Ramadan Mubarak to all those observing this month. And inshallah, بتنعاد علينا وعليكم بالصحة والسلامة. We hope everyone has a great rest of the day or rest of the night. And thank you.
Thank you.